workforce, we can save enough money that they can opt out and get out of Social Security and take care of it. But we are facing some very serious problems economically. The dollar, of course, everybody knows that's in big trouble. Our obligation overseas now is well over $2.5 trillion. Our national debt is over $9 trillion, approaching $10 trillion. This year, our national debt may go up $750 billion in 1 year. That's how much spending is going on. And with a recession, the revenues are going to go down. And there's only one thing left in Washington for them to try to solve the problem, is they spend more money. You know, this whole idea, and I imagine quite a few of you receive checks in the mail, but this whole idea that the Congress says what we're going to do is stimulate the economy by sending everybody a check for either $600 or $1,200 and it's going to make everything well again? Complete nonsense.
Ron Paul.
You know, Washington has no money. They tax us to the hill, and they know they can't tax anymore. Maybe they'd cause a tax revolt. Who knows? But then they borrow a lot, and we've been borrowing from foreigners. We've been living off the foreigners. We get to print the money, and we spend it overseas, and our good jobs go overseas. But even those people who have been benefiting on our purchases are getting tired of our dollars. But then what do they do when they still come up short? They want to send out these $160 billion to make the people feel good. So they do what they always resort to when they run out of money. They can't tax it, they can't borrow, so they just inflate. That means they send treasury bills over to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve creates billions and billions of dollars out of thin air. By the time this $150 billion got started 6 months ago, or when they talked about it, until you got it in your pocket, I imagine it was all spent on higher gasoline prices because of the anticipated inflation that was coming. In the 1970s, I entered in politics mainly because of interest in economics and especially monetary policy. Because I had lived through the 1960s and understood the terms guns and butter, and it didn't matter, you could spend. And I had been drafted, I was in the Air Force for 5 years, and they kept saying, you know, that we can handle it. But in this 1970s, it was a payback time, and it was a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of inflation, a lot of unemployment, and high interest rates, and yet today, our basic conditions are much worse. Our debt is so much worse. Our foreign debt, our balance of payments is so much worse. The dollar's in much worse shape. And yet, that's exactly what we're doing again, paying for guns and butter. And this time it could get very, pretty dangerous. And that is why the message of liberty, the message of the Constitution is so vital right now. It's so important that you cling to it and use it and spread this message. We don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, or in September, but we do know that if our message doesn't get out, it will not be good for this country, so that is a job that we must pursue. During the 60s, when I was in the Air Force, I remember rather clearly, about why we couldn't leave Vietnam. And when it was measured in deaths, that was much worse. Even though our crisis is probably bigger right now, and at least the deaths aren't nearly what they were during the Vietnam War. In 1968, the election was basically to throw out the Democrats because of the war. They were sick and tired of Johnson and the war. And yet, after 68, another 30,000 Americans died. And then finally, we had to leave, but they kept saying, don't leave, or there would be a domino effect, and that whole region would be swept, by communism. But they were completely wrong on that. It turns out now that the Chinese are more capitalistic than we are, and they're our banker. This is a tragic outcome. In Vietnam, they had a rough year or two, and 20 years of the French and the Americans telling them what to do with their country. But what are they doing now? They've become westernized. They've become communists. Their president comes here and visit. We visit with them. We trade with them. And they're prosperous. We achieved, or they achieved, really, the two of us have achieved in peace what couldn't be achieved in war. We have to have more faith and confidence and understanding of the advice of the founders when they said, you know, a non-interventionist foreign policy, stay out of the internal affairs of other nations, trade with people, be friends with people. Does that mean other countries that we talk to are less than perfect? That is true. But if you want to work for perfection, we should work for perfection here so we can set an example for the world. That's what we have resolutions on the House floor, and it will be condemning some civil liberty infractions of some country around the world. And it'd be justified criticism, but I usually vote against it, believing it's not my business, I'm not to threaten them. And besides, if we, in Congress, were meeting our responsibility, what we would be doing is protecting the civil liberties of the American people and repeal the Patriot Act. Since 9/11, our civil liberties have been under serious attack. And by the way, the Patriot Act wasn't written after 9/11. It was written before 9/11. But even the version of that we had to vote on, which was probably about 3 weeks after 9/11, was not available to us. It became available about noontime. The debate started at 1. It was a very complex bill, and it was available on the internet, not on the website it was supposed to be on. There was no way any member of Congress read the Patriot Act and voted for it in the House of Representatives. When I talked to other members, I said, I come here voting for this. And they said, well, there's probably a lot of lousy stuff in there, but, you know, it's called the Patriot Act, and 9/11 just happened. The American people want us to do something. I said, does that mean you have to do something bad? You know, it doesn't make any sense. But our attack on civil liberties had been going on for a long time. You know, the modern war on drugs has been going on since the early 70s. That has not served us well, and it has not really helped the people who have medical addictions. You know, I hardly think criminalizing a medical addiction is the proper way to deal with the problem. We finally figured that out. The prohibition of alcohol didn't work very well, and we treat alcoholics when they don't commit violent crimes in a way that we're supposed to help them. But all of a sudden now, if you happen to be sick, and you live in a state that has legalized marijuana, and you use marijuana for medical reasons, if you have cancer or AIDS or chemotherapy or something like that, and you use it and it helps you, and the state has allowed it, the federal government still comes in and arrests people like that and put them in prison. And sometimes people who have used drugs, which I absolutely don't condone because I think they're very dangerous, but I also think so many of the drugs the doctors prescribe are very dangerous too. But the issue of drugs and many other personal liberties, to me, is something that we should deal with understanding where the responsibility comes from. We assume that it's okay to have your responsibility of what you put into your intellect, what you study and read intellectually. And we also allow individuals to deal with what type of religious values they have and what their religious beliefs are. But when it comes to what we put into our mouths and what we smoke, we have made the assumption or allowed our government to say that we can't eat anything or smoke anything without the government telling us it's okay. That, I think, is absolutely wrong.